I've opened up my UV map and I've opened up the texture I want to use. First thing I'm going to do with the UV map is lock the transparency. And often enough it's better to put a color on there instead of that gray that comes in by default, especially if the color of your texture map reflects the same values. So I've locked the layer transparency. I'm going to choose a red and I'll hit Option Delete to fill it, and it'll kind of bump it up a bit more. Next I'll go to my texture and I'm going to copy just the sword and scabbard here. I'll hit Command C to copy, Command W to put it away, and then in my UV map I'll hit Command V to paste. I'm going to change the layer order so it's below the UV map that I need for reference. Now it's just a matter of kind of scaling this in, but usually before I start I'll get rid of the white background that I see here. So I'm using my wand tool. I'll hit delete on the keyboard. Now before I fine tune this, I'm going to put a dark gray background on my texture. And I'm going to do that so that if the texture map doesn't quite fit the model properly, there'll be a value that's similar to the texture map itself that'll fill in any little gaps. So I'll hit I on the keyboard and I'll select one of the grays from the scabbard. I'll put a new layer in and I'll fill that layer with that gray and I'll put it below the texture map. Now I'm going to scale the texture map to the UV map that we have here. I'll hit Command T. What you may do is maybe start with the point here, and all you need to do is hold the shift and drag so the very bottom of the scabbard kind of lines up with it. And I'm kind of trying to put that diamond into position roughly. One last thing we need to do is mask out where the sword actually goes in. So I'll click on that layer. I'm going to zoom in a little closer. At the bottom of my layer window, I'll introduce a layer mask. I'll get my pen tool and I'll carefully go around and select just below scabbard. If you have a steady hand, you could edit that way, but I prefer this way so I get something a little bit more exact. And then I'll come around to where I began. I'll right click, make selection, click OK. B for brush, and I'll make sure my brush is 100% opaque and flow as well. And I'll just hide that content, deselect and save. Now I've also missed a couple little white spots on either side where the belt would have gone through. So I'll hit W on the keyboard. With the wand tool selected, I'll change the tolerance to about 30. And I'll click on the white on this side, hold the shift key, and I'll shift select till I get it all. And I'll do the same on the other side. I'll hit B on the keyboard and I'll mask those white areas out, deselect and save. Now we're ready to return to Maya. In Maya, I've selected my geometry and I'm right clicking and choosing material attribute. And I'm going to go to the base color node and I'm going to the checkerboard. I'll click on the checkerboard to get the create render node. I'll click on file, and then for the image name I'll click on the folder, click on my texture map, and there we have it. All right, now if I needed to tweak this, I could do one of two things. I could go to Photoshop or I could go into my UV editor, and with that selected I could always right click, choose UVs, and if I wanted to I could go in and select a number of UVs and I could tweak my geometry that way. Back in Maya, I'll select my geometry and I'll right click to go to the material attribute. In my material attribute, I'll click on the checkerboard at the end of the slider. I'll choose File. I'll click on the yellow folder and I'll go out and I'll get my texture map and apply it. Now for any reason you need to adjust this in any way, you can select your geometry and you can go to the UV texture editor. You could right click and choose UVs, and you can see that if you were to do that, you can adjust your texture placement this way, or you could always go back into Photoshop and do it there as well. And that's how we would texture map a simple polygon scabbard for the sword that we created in a prior tutorial.